Hello guys and welcome back. This is Mr. Siege. Now, of course, this is another episode of Siegewatch where I dive into a random KVK, and this really is another random one, and basically have a look at what's going on in terms of how many towers are set up, who's fighting, what gear they're using, what sort of reports they're getting, what their commanders are like. Are they maxed? Are they 5511? Obviously, we don't know until we get in there and take a look at each individual account and see how they're doing basically. So this is a primarily C/D seed KVK. I believe it's Keener Blades as well, which I was told. And what actually drew me to this KVK is it was kind of the only one I could find that they were actually fighting right now. And although I say they're fighting right now, it's kind of minimal. But what I did notice, which was quite interesting, is I saw a Zhuge Liang in a tower, and that's what really drew me in and thinking, maybe this is worth actually having a look at and showing you guys some other possibilities when you're obviously using a ranged march. I won't necessarily call it a siege march because you don't have to use siege troops. And I was giving a guy some advice, and this is one of the guys here with the Zhuge out. And there's other ways to fight with a tower. And I used to fight with infantry troops, T5 infantry, and my really good infantry equipment. Now I had nothing else. I didn't have siege. I didn't have T5. I didn't have siege equipment either. I didn't even have like the harvester set and stuff like that I could have used. So using my infantry equipment and infantry armaments, I think armaments were out when the range commanders came out, was the only thing I could use. And obviously, I really wanted to give engineering a go. I saw huge potential in getting decent results on the field, or maybe better results than what I was getting from my best march, which was at the time Guan Scipio. And as you can see here, this is a guy I was questioning and taking a look at. Now, he could have easily got back into the city in this scenario, but didn't. And in fact, he did just let them swarm him down for some strange reason. Maybe he had another troop in the field. Also, we've got the blackout that was above there. He didn't even set up into a tower, and he just got swarmed down and obviously sent home. Again, not sure why, but obviously these are just some of the scenarios that can happen with your siege march. You may not be able to get away, and that happens. So I eventually got a reply from one of the people that I was obviously contacting, Emre, I think his name is, and he was running Catherine and Narcissus. He was getting some decent reports in terms of KP trades. You're trading, but very very minimal amount of kills. So really not that effective. And I know I haven't really tried Catherine and Narcissus myself properly. I've not really had the right situations to actually get them on the field and give them a really really good try. I have split them up minimally, and they were doing okay. I think I used Narcissus with Shajar actually used as a bit of a buffing march. Healing my siege commanders around was very useful, and Catherine's great at using it like for debuffing and stuff like that. But if you're running one siege march, you don't really want to use the epic pair because they won't get you a great deal of kills. I really don't think it's a great investment if you're hoping to actually just run one siege march on the field. So I do think if you want to invest in like a meta march like your Margaret Cordoba or Garja Cordoba, and you want to run the epic commanders on the side, providing a bit more of a debuff just with like some T4, some decent equipment still, and you could get positive trades, which means it's not costing you anything really. You're gonna have to heal a few troops, but at the end of the day, you are trading positive. Now, if you're only running 3 or 4 marches anyway, why not shove out the epic commanders and trying to get some sort of positive trade and decent results? It's all extra kills. I'm not saying that isn't a bad idea, and obviously debuffing the enemy plus buffing yourself is always positive. So, we eventually got some feedback from the guy that was using Liang, as you can see, Gogolus Pisano. Now, I did note to him that he's using legendary gathering gear, which isn't great. I would much prefer to see a crit harvester set on there. Obviously, even his helm isn't ideal here. So, obviously, that's the first thing, bit of advice I give him. But he has only just started testing with Siege, doing some tests, which is how I started out. I started testing with infantry, like I said, infantry gear, infantry troops, because that was my best set of equipment. So this guy's in the testing stage, and the experimenting with Siege can be really fun. obviously I'm just letting him know that I saw him using the Liang earlier. What was he using? Was he using archer gear, archer troops? And, I was interested in getting some feedback and the reports he was getting. Because I used to get pretty decent reports when I was using my infantry. And obviously the great thing about using another troop type with another troop obviously gear, you are going to benefit from the troop countering. Obviously, archers counter infantry, infantry counter cav, and cav counter archers. So if you're running cav, you could focus on archer troops and you'll get that 5% extra damage boost. Now, obviously, when you're running Siege, they get countered by everything anyway, so you're not benefiting from that massively. But obviously, using Siege in your engineering march is obviously going to be the best you could do. If you've got all the decent equipment, all the decent armaments, that is going to have a huge benefit for you. Now, I've made videos in the past comparing using different gear sets compared to obviously your epic Siege set compared to legendary infantry set. That was a long time ago. So pretty much when I first started making content, obviously for siege marches. So at this point, I'm giving him some advice on maybe use Caesar with a museum buff. Obviously, Caesar is a great other option to run with your Cordoba. Now, he hasn't got Cordoba maxed. I think it was like 5-2-3-1 or something like that. It was a bit of a mishmash. But yeah, running Caesar with your Cordoba is like a cheap alternative. Just max in with the museum, get that all damage bonus, and it's going to be way better than having a Liang. And you can still run it with archers or infantry gear. That's not a problem, especially when your gear is way better than your siege gear, which is the case for this guy here. Now, the other options are very, very little really. You could use your Philip if you've maxed Philip, but a lot of people aren't going to have maxed Philip and, not be using him as a field troop. So obviously I do keep seeing the blackout popping up on the field, and now I can see he's got a Garja Cordoba march. So I'm really keen on talking to him because obviously that is the siege meta march. And obviously I'm expecting some decent enough reports. Now I've seen him doing some pretty odd things, bad positioning, attacking directly, not in a tower, and also not being able to get away. So running siege is awkward, and sometimes it takes a lot of skill. It's very, very different to running a field march. Not easy at all times, as you can see from a lot of the opportunities here that these guys are getting. Now, they're getting pushed back quite a lot. They're either pushing forward or getting pushed back, and that isn't great for siege. So from these situations, you can't expect huge reports. Now, we did see a report from the blackout in the end, 300%, nothing crazy. 49k kills, though, it's a good start for quite a short report. We're looking about 6 or 7 minutes worth of fighting here. And if his gear's not amazing, which I don't know at this stage, we'll obviously have a look in the rest of the video. Hopefully we get a reply from him. That's not a bad report at all. I presume he's got fairly decent gear to get something like that. But again, getting siege gear is fairly expensive. You can't get it from Lucerne Scrolls. You can't get it from opening chests in, obviously, the tavern. And yeah, it can be very, very costly in gems to actually acquire. So when you're having these situations here and you're not really making use of your siege march because it's very, very tough fighting, then it can be a bit of a waste of investment, let's say. Obviously, we've got the Catherine on the field right now, and that's pew-pewing away. But shortly, it looks like they're going to be pushing this ball through again. I'd say, in terms of field of this KVK, the allies, obviously in blue, have probably got less field than the ones in white, and that's probably going to be a bit of a struggle for those siege marches too. So he has got maxed Catherine and Narcissus, and I'm presuming it's a he. I was just looking through some reports that he's got here. Not all good, not all bad either, though. Now, obviously, Pisano is saying at least my gear for Archer is very good. That's why I gave it on the Siege March. So, yeah, obviously, it makes sense just to have a bit of an experiment with your Siege Marches. Now, I encourage all of you just to have a bit of an experiment like that. If you're just starting, it's really worth a go. Now, comparing your reports when running kind of poor siege gear with T4 siege troops and obviously great other gear with T5 troops, it can make a huge difference. The only other thing is, though, just be careful if you're running your T5 troops. Try not to get swarmed. because it will be very costly. And if you're using kind of low investment commanders, it's gonna hurt quite a bit. Yeah, that's going to be very costly indeed for you guys. Now, another thing he was saying is obviously he wants to experiment with siege because it's much easier to have a beer and fight at the same time when you're running a siege march, and in some cases that can be true. Now, that side of the fighting was getting kind of bad. Let's just say bad. There wasn't much going on. There wasn't many siege marches. In fact, there's very little siege marches in this KVK at all. But we've just seen the Blackouts equipment there, and it was actually pretty decent. And obviously, we're going back into that report that we've already seen, and it shows why he did get a fairly decent amount of kills. Which, yeah, for the gear he's got, it's kind of not surprising that he's got one good report there. Now, we did get in touch with a guy that I know pretty well from the Siege Discord group, my Discord group, and I actually stumbled upon him totally by random. I didn't know he was fighting in this KVK. In fact, he did message me a couple of days ago and say, look, drop in if you can. And by absolute luck, I dropped in. Now, we popped over to this side of the map now. A bloody family, and obviously they're fighting against United Kingdom of 2741, and this is where I know this the guy from the Siege Discord group. This guy here, he's got 2 siege marches out now, very stationary. Not sure what he's doing there. He could have even took them round this flag being built and just pew-pewed a few little marches that were getting hit by some AoE or being targeted in the field while they're swarming down this flag. He would have got a few kills here and there, but you know that I did get swarmed down pretty fast, so maybe just thought not to bother. And obviously at this point I contacted him, and he then obviously let me know who he was. So yeah, great to see you fighting there, but you know, not many enemies on the field. So his siege marches are there, and they're not really doing a lot. He can't get in any fights at the moment. Obviously, he was happy to send me some reports that he had got from this KVK. I think his Zone 5 opened only like 1 or 2 days ago, so there's still potential for a bit of fighting now. But yeah, he was more than happy to share his reports and his gear, you know, good and bad reports, because you do have a lot of bad reports too, or at least you should do, especially in KVKs like this. I'm very, very used to myself. But on his Margaret, he's got a really decent set of gear with a horn and drum, and I really recommend that if you've got a couple of siege marches. That drum will just keep topping up that extra little bit of rage, and the horn is absolutely essential, in my opinion, for a siege march. Getting that rage up as fast as you can, because it can be quite slow on a siege march when you're not being hit. Now, his Gorge Armada has also got a fairly decent set. You know, it's not legendary, but he's got a decent epic set there, totaling about 60% of stats. And 60% of stats on a siege march can perform pretty well. And you know, a bit of march speed with that flag and the Delane's amulet's also very, very nice indeed. Now, just looking here, there's no fighting that can be done with the siege march right now. I think it's just a case of rallying and, you know, swarming flags. That's the sort of stage they're at right now. Maybe the team's in a bit of a downtime at the moment. The enemy's in a bit of a downtime. So he has sent some reports, and you know, he's had some decent reports so far. He's Margaret Cordoba, so that's what he's running with Margaret. Obviously, we didn't know that until now. All we've seen is there's gear on Margaret and there's gear on Gorge Armada. And then obviously he sends some more reports. Another Margaret report with Cordoba again. Again, very good results, positive trades all around, which you'd kind of expect. I love Margaret Cordoba. It's just absolutely pops off for me, to be honest with you. Works really well. I don't know if it was ever supposed to work that well. But yeah, I mean, look at this report against Gorgo Luce there. 1 to 20k kills is crazy. Loads of positive reports there. And hopefully I'll send some negative ones. Well, I say negative, but just not less than 100%, of course. I did look around for any more fighting going on, but there wasn't any. There's only these 2 spots on the whole map that any fighting was going on, so kind of disappointing in terms of the amount of fighting in this KVK. I really would have expected a little bit more, but I guess that's how the allies and enemies are positioned on the map. You know, you can't really help with the map layout sometimes. Obviously, just having a quick look back over the fighting that we were looking at earlier. Still a little bit going on there, but nothing crazy. Now, he has sent a few more reports here. A few worse reports. 164% 40k to 68k. It's not a bad report still. But then he's using Garja Cordoba, and obviously Garja Cordoba is a very, very strong march, probably the best march. Now, he obviously wasn't running Margaret Cordoba at the same time because that's impossible. But whether he still had this worse gear on Garja Marda, I'd have to presume that he was. Maybe he wasn't, but he got swarmed down there. And another great report from your Margaret Cordoba, and another one coming in. So I think he's leaving that gear on Margaret, to be fair. So Margaret's going to perform better with Cordoba. And another one where he's been swarmed down. Very short report, because only three little reports there. It was looking good initially, but then obviously that swarm has really took this report to pretty bad amount of KP ratio. And again, that's just what happens sometimes when you're running Siege in these sorts of KVKs. People are very, very quick to charge you down and swarm your tower when they get the opportunity. And that's just the way it is. But yeah, very unfortunate because his report was probably going very well until that little bit of a swarm. So guys, that was kind of it from this KVK. There wasn't a lot going on, and obviously I'm not going to prolong the video any more than it needs to be. The little bit of fighting that we saw was obviously, quite interesting. It's nice to have a look at people experimenting on the field, and by all means, I think you should go out and do it, guys. It's a lot of fun. I love obviously running my siege marches, my engineering commanders, and I hope you guys do too. So guys, look forward to seeing you on the next one. This is Mr. Siege, and bye bye.